this. I've never met a human being in my life that does not want to get better at something. The problem is not that they're not ambitious enough. The problem is that they don't know how to channel the ambition, their talent, and the effort they're investing in a way that maximizes the return on investment of those crucial assets. Also in tennis, 86% of points are won through three things. First serve, return serve, second serve. But then you go in and you watch a lot of tennis academies and you see people spending 60, 70% of the time training things that aren't those three things. That's crazy. I'm sick and tired of journalists occupying the space when it comes to talking about personal development, because they do superficial skims, cherry pick research findings. The secret to success is this: I need to wake up, I need to stare at the sun for 2 minutes, then I need to jump in an ice bath, then I need to have a kale smoothie, then I need to do my manifestation. Like Cristiano Ronaldo, Elon Musk, Serena Williams, they've excelled in their crafts because they've done two things. They've identified concordant goals, and then they've engaged in world-class development. There's nothing more virtuous than trying to get better at whatever it is you're aiming to do. No matter the starting point, you literally make the world better every time you up your game. I've studied talent, potential for 20 years, and I'm telling you, you matter. The world needs you, your family needs you, your community needs you, society needs you, and we need everyone to level up, step up.
Welcome everyone. Today we have the pleasure of being joined by James King. Hi James, how are we doing?
I'm really good, mate. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
It's been in the works for a while, hasn't it? I mean, we've worked together for the last 5-6 years in regards to some of the stuff that we'll talk about today, and you've been hugely influential actually on helping me to identify concepts like my sweet spot and these kinds of things that we're going to dip into. So really excited to have you on. Do you want to provide a little intro of your story, your background, and what you do for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Henry. That's really kind of you to say. Put simplest, my role is a peak performance coach. I think that's the best way to say it. Often described as performance director in sport. And the way I look at it is, as my role is to put the individuals and organizations I'm working with under the conditions that will enable them to become everything they can potentially be. And I use this term to accelerate excellence. So by accelerate, I mean to increase in a rate, amount, and extent. Excellence being that quality of being outstanding. And yeah, the way I kind of look at it is like the individual, the organization is like this lump of stone, and our job is to support the individual and the organization to carve away strategically. So strategy is a massive part of what I do, but with effort. So again, how do we summon that? And then offensive spirit to reveal the potential masterpiece that exists inside. And as far as I can remember, I've been obsessed with human performance. There was one particular weekend, I think, where upon reflection, when asked this question that really jumped out, I was living abroad at the time. I must have been about 6-7 years old. My dad was in the Air Force, and we were currently living in Sardinia in Italy. And my mum and my younger sister were flying home for the long weekend. And I was left with dad. So it's like my first lad's weekend. And I'm going into work with dad. This is before this health and safety, right? So I'm on this flight line on an Air Force base, watching US and Royal Air Force pilots just launch into the sky Mach 1. And, you know, as a 6-year-old, that's just nuts, right? And I remember thinking, wow, this is so cool. And I'm fist bumping pilots, jumping in cockpits. And then that evening, I remember going home, we get to pizza, I'm watching World's Strongest Man with dad. And I remember there being a like vivid memory of this mirror at the end of the living room. And I remember like seeing the size of these guys and trying to almost strain my biceps, expecting them to just grow, you know, just like these monsters on World's Strongest Man. The next morning, I went and watched the rugby game. It was the Air Force playing an Italian team. And I remember one single player had such a devastating effect on the opposition and pretty much won the Air Force the game. And I remember clearly at the end of that weekend thinking, why do they get to fly the aircraft? Why is he the world's strongest man? And what is it that enables that individual to have such a devastating effect on the opposition for the benefit of his team? But then most importantly, is any of this even controllable? And I guess that's where my quest to like uncover this and answer this question began. And I've obsessed on reading biographies, and it was always like multidisciplinary, whether it was entrepreneurs like Branson, special forces commanders like Sir Peter de la Billiere, or athletes like Beckham. I guess, again, just searching for answers. Eventually that would take me to University of Edinburgh, and another thing you and I have in common, I spent 5 years there studying performance sciences, and for me that was game changing. I mean, if you've ever had that feeling where your brain's just telling you you're in the right place, that's the feeling I had when I went to visit Edinburgh, and I absolutely loved it. I remember that first week, sat in lectures, an introduction to mastery, expertise, the philosophy of science. I remember just being sat there, sort of looking left and right, like, did you hear that? And then right arm goes in the air. Can you say it again, please? Almost like, have I missed that? Did he actually say that? And then I caught fire there, and then I couldn't understand why every politician, business owner, leader, military commander wasn't in that room extracting every ounce of potential that science had to offer. And you'll know more than most, but like, don't get me wrong, it's inherently messy. I think that's one of the challenges with academia. It's really hard to understand. It's taken me a long time to sort of take that theory to practice, put it to work, orientate it, and find out what stands up to the rigors of the real world. But that was a real significant experience for me. And I guess another one that was quite significant would be flash forward a few years later. I guess I wanted to put some of the science to work myself. I found myself on a selection course within the British military. And there was a moment in that course where I guess hundreds of us had been whittled down to not many at all. And it was 2 days to go, and we're presented with this task, and I'm just like, that's fucking ridiculous. You know, as far as I was concerned, that was it, done for me. I didn't think success was an option. Thought what was being asked of us was just completely unrealistic, physically, mentally. Thought it was quite dangerous. Yeah, I sort of mentally decided that was me done. And then flash forward sort of 36 hours and managed to get through this process. And for me, that was a really significant experience that shaped everything I've done since, personally and professionally, in that it completely shifted my expectations of what's possible when you put individuals under the right conditions, the conditions that, you know, we're going to talk about in this conversation. And it also highlighted to me that studying all this stuff is great, but it's not until you really try the learning on. And I encourage people to go into this conversation we're going to have now with that mindset on. We're going to talk about some really powerful stuff, some of the scientific principles that will really that do drive success. But talking about them isn't going to do anything. You need to put them to work, because it was only in moments like that where you're exposed to those conditions that my brain, at least anyway, and the science would suggest most others, internalizes those learnings. I mean, I'd studied how beliefs, expectations, and many of the conditions we're going to talk about today impact your ability to perform at the upper limits of human potential, on demand, under pressure. But it's not until you try them on firsthand that you really internalize those learnings. And it's all this cliche stuff we'll see on Instagram, right? Like, the one that stood out, just reflected on that, is that whole, it's not until you're completely fucked that you realize you're only 40% fucked. And that was one of many that cemented to me on that day, and it completely shifted my perception of what's possible. And I swore there and then I'd never underestimate the potential of anyone I ever work with, again, in terms of them going after whatever it is they're going after. Flash forward a few years, I ended up having a dinner at Nobu that would be another sort of significant emotional event for me. It was with an ex-Goldman Sachs super trader, Moafaq Salti, and I'd end up working with him for a few years, and he probably taught me more than anyone else I've ever met in terms of what it takes to win. He was one of these super traders. He generated like north of, like, it's the movie version stuff, right? Hundreds of millions a year years on end. But he decided he wanted to leave, and sort of, he thought trading could be done better in terms of sort of the performance aspect. And he wanted to set up his own fund, so he did. At this point in time, though, he was struggling to identify and develop talent, to download the expertise he had, and then subsequently upload it into individuals who possess the hardware from a technical and almost attitude perspective to be able to make that software functional and deliver outlier returns in trading and investing. And I guess that he'd reached out to Edinburgh University. They'd recommended he have a conversation with me. So we're in Nobu, and I'd never been in a restaurant like that in my life, mate. I know it's your favorite, but I was sat there having dinner with Alf, and that's what I'd describe as a redhead moment for me. I've not even really used chopsticks, mate. And at one point during the meal, he literally goes, "Do you want a fork?" It was sort of mega embarrassing. Concurrently, I'm also scanning the menu as he's ordering these bottles of wine, and I'm just sat there thinking, like, my God, I hope he does want to split this bill. But we had a wicked conversation. He was like us. He's like obsessed with human performance. But most importantly for me, he had the humility to accept that, right, whilst I'm an expert at trading, that doesn't make me an expert when it comes to excellence or performance. And what I'm talking about there is how to identify and predict superstars that aren't superstars yet, how to maximize their development trajectory, how to inject his own levels of intensity, motivation, drive, discipline into the rest of his team. And of course, that's what I'd studied, and I'd been in and around some organizations that had done that well. But at this point in time, for me, it was all theoretical, personal experience, or sort of copy pasting. And he gave me an opportunity. He basically said, come into this organization and align us with every principle that can stack every edge we can find in our favor of success. And I did. It was an incredible opportunity. Again, flash forward a few years, and we'd sort of went from zero to become the world's largest derivatives trading fund in oil. We were trading more barrels of oil a day than Glencore, Shell, and BP, and we were doing it with a bunch of 23-year-old kids that had been in the organization for under 3 years. Alf was on the beach in Singapore, and I was leading this company. And again, that was another shifter for me in terms of, like, if you told me at the beginning of that experience 3 years from now you're going to be acting CEO of a trading house that's at the tip of the spear in City of London, Wall Street, I would have just laughed you out the building. And again, of course, and I want to make that crystal clear, this is not about me. This is about these principles and the principles that, you know, we're going to discuss over the next hour or so. And then I guess for me, in that, to wrap up that story, I guess it came full circle in that, you know, concurrent to all that, I've been used as a bit of a sledgehammer in sport. The stuff I've done in sports tended to be quite come in for 2 days and really just kick the tires, hold the mirror up. And was gap analysis in terms of what we drives excellence and where the individual organizations are out of alignment with it. But now I'm so grateful. I love what I do, and I'm now getting a phone call when the shit hits the fan from the individuals whose sort of biographies I was reading as a kid, and that obviously means the world to me.
Definitely. It's a really interesting story, and I guess in some ways conventional, having gone through the traditional education, the undergrad, masters, but then one of the things I remember when I first met you all those years ago was you had very different perspective in a world where there was, from my understanding, quite a narrow lens on how you create environments for individuals to thrive. Like, for example, in trading, I wouldn't say people had ever broken it down into its constituent parts and reverse engineered that up from a first principles standpoint. And I guess people listening today are going to be thinking, that sounds amazing. And they're probably very ambitious. But one of the phrases that I really like that you've used before is ambition is not the problem. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, good question. What I mean by that is I've never met a human being in my life that does not want to get better at something. And obviously I've been privileged to work with particularly ambitious people. But when we examine the symptoms, or which in most cases we're having the conversation of the results that they're producing that aren't where they want them to be, and then you sort of do the algebra in terms of what's their process for achievement, the problem is not that they're not ambitious enough. The problem is that they don't know how to channel the ambition, their talent, and the effort they're investing in a way that maximizes the return on investment of those crucial assets. And that's the way I look at it. And some people might find that's crude, but I look at every performance environment as, what is the currency for success here? In trading, it's black and white, right? Dollars. And you can reverse engineer everything and break it down, and you can measure everything, which is why it was such a perfect petri dish for me to do a lot of working. But it's like, what wins you points? And then based off that, it's about, okay, how do we maximize the ambition, talent, and effort in our organization? And that's a big part of that's the talent identification piece. How do we get the right people in the first place? But then it comes down to, how do we profit from every hour, drop of sweat, blood, tears that we invest in pursuit of our goals, so that we can crank that development trajectory as steep as possible? Because that's what I get paid to do. And more importantly, that's what I love to do. And yeah, when it comes to the ambition bit, I've never been like, you know, the problem here, it's just not ambitious enough. Just don't have the ambition in this organization. Never been the problem in my professional work so far.
And are there any stories of that where you've gone in and they've been hyper ambitious, but it's been very clear that they haven't necessarily thought about the processes. Maybe they've had the mental model of you just need to work harder rather than smarter. Like, have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, I see it everywhere I go, well, almost everywhere I go. But yeah, I mean, a good example would be at Mandara initially. Well, that's the trading fund. So initially, I guess when you went working there, my word, like everyone in that room's got a first-class degree from Oxbridge, Ivy League, the top universities. You know, if you got a first at Edinburgh, it's like, oh, dunce over there. And, you know, many of these individuals have worked at the tier one banks in front office roles, like you know, your Goldman Sachs, for example. So if you look at work rate in terms of hours spent and time invested, I mean, for me, traders work harder than any other that I've ever worked with, including military. You know, these guys get the night bus to work. And, you know, especially in London, right? Because the whole reason one of the core reasons London's the financial capital of the world is that, you know, we can trade Singapore, Asian time zones in the morning, and we can trade European through the middle of the day. And then you can trade the US through the evening. So it's this like central hub where you can trade the world, which makes it the global center in that respect. But that means you got long ass days. And that's just doing the job. Then when it comes to development and training, they'll be in on weekends. So in terms of work rate, you could measure it in multiple ways. You could measure, you know, you're the expert in the physical side in terms of you can strap these guys up. You could see their HRV, their output, their intensity, their intense work. You could measure it by hours work done, and it was huge. But again, it links back to what you talking about earlier. It's like, what's the return on investment of all that work done? Okay, fundamentally, what we're talking about here is being incredibly efficient versus being incredibly effective. And in elite performance, we need both. And Mandara at that point in time was incredibly efficient. You couldn't fault anyone for work rate, timing, time in the office. And that time wasn't just sat there. That was intense engagement in the primary task or primary role. But where the problem was, okay, the things we're doing aren't actually making us better. So we're doing lots of things, but the things we're doing aren't really driving us forward. We aren't measuring that. So obviously you want to improve anything, start measuring it. That would be one tip for me. But then the other thing was that if you have the people that aren't concordant, and we'll talk about that, what I mean by that in more depth in a bit, but if you have the wrong hardware, you can work it hard as you like, but it's not going to produce winning results. So if I'm trying to mow a field and I'm racing against you and I've got a tractor that just does not have the size engine for mowing this stuff required to mow this sort of field or process this sort of ground than yours, then I'm just not going to have any chance in hell of competing with you in that competition. So I can work as hard as I like, or I can be as ambitious as I like, but I'm working with the wrong hardware, and my process for capitalizing on the hardware is wrong. The product's going to be inferior performance. So they're the two things that are absolutely fundamental to get right. Are we chasing the right goals in the first place? Do we understand the problem we're trying to solve and how best to solve it? And I think that's where the two things I'd say to summarize that, where most go wrong are that, as you touched on, reasoning by analogy, the copy pasting. Oh, Gwyneth Paltrow meditates, so should I. The one that kills me is the All Blacks. I'm sick of people talking about the All Blacks. The All Blacks, oh, your leaders eat last, sweep sheds. I'm like, it's not why the All Blacks are so good. For me, it's got nothing to do with it. These are just marginal gains nonsense. Like, the reason they're so good is that their talent identification, talent development system is probably one of the best in the world, if not the best across all domains, all companies, sport, business, military. That whole country is geared to do one thing, and it's produce an All Blacks. All the clubs work together coherently. The talent identification development programs are flawlessly integrated with that sole goal, rather than say in England, for example, where the clubs are independent, siloed organizations. The relationship with the RFU and English rugby clubs is terrible. It's club versus country. It's the same in English football. And these are what I would describe as the foundational principles and the foundational mechanisms we need to get right before we start talking about sweeping sheds and eating last and all this stuff, which makes for really nice, catchy headline titles. But come on, you think that's really the secret behind the All Black success?
It's really interesting because we come at it from quite different paradigms. I think your area of expertise, without a doubt, is developing or identifying really high potential individuals and developing them into superstars. Whereas, like, for example, my time with New Zealand Rugby, my observations were they have a really good talent pool and good talent identification piece, but it's largely their ability to then create unified vision, sense of belonging, these kinds of things. So yeah, maybe that's
so
conversation
no, Henry,
for
I agree
another.
completely with that, but that can only come if you've got a cohered strategy top to bottom that everyone in the country buys into, right? So when you're talking about unified strategy, that's like, for me, that's the whole, they understand the problem they're trying to solve. And the problem they're trying to solve is the All Blacks will be the best in the world. And everyone between All Blacks and the kid playing being an All Black and that kid playing his first game of rugby, everything between that and that is geared to remove any residue that impedes that individual getting there. There's not blockers in terms of the clubs having a competing with the national team or so on and so forth. But yes, everything you've said there, I think, is bang on, and it's all part of that. So that reasoning by analogy is a big one for me. You know, as you said, you need to break down your own problems into their own most basic elements, and then reassemble them from your ground up. And that's what enables people to emerge with innovative solutions, breakthroughs. But then the other crucial piece there as well is, you know, you need to know what it takes to win in your craft. And again, another example I sort of commonly use there is, and you'd have seen this in sport, and sort of seen it in areas we've worked together on. And I use the tennis example. So in tennis, 86% of points are won through three things: first serve, return serve, second serve. But then you go in and you watch a lot of tennis academies, and you see people spending 60, 70% of the time training things that aren't those three things. That's crazy. And it happens so often in so many organizations. And that was one of the first things, of course, we do at Mandara. What wins us points here? You know, because yes, you do lots of things, but what things contribute most to you delivering returns? And then we'll proportionally focus our effort there. And it comes back to that, understand the problem we're trying to solve so well that if you don't understand your problems well enough, that the solutions practically fall on your lap. Your challenge is understanding your problems more. That's the extent to which that understand piece is so important to me. And that means that everyone can buy in with high conviction in terms of the actions. If you've got a lot of people arguing about what we should and shouldn't do, that's a classic symptom of you don't really understand what your problems are as an organization.
And yeah, I guess there's going to be periods, aren't there, where you have high levels of maybe process or outcome focused conflict, but that should be in regards to small details in achieving this larger unified goal that all understand and each understand their constituent part in being able to contribute towards that.
Yeah, of course, you're always going to get conflict here and there, but you should get less of it if you've done the understand piece right. And it should be higher quality, and the profit from the conflict you have should be higher quality. And then guess what happens? Oh, wow, when we have conflict, we profit from it. When we push each other, when we tell the truth, when we push back, but we do so with empathy and with a default mindset that, okay, this person's got positive intentions, but I'm not understanding what they're saying. And it's my job to try and understand. And that might, most elite performance environments are pushy and competitive, but collaborative. But when you engage in those conversations and the outcome is, shit, we leveled up from having that tough conversation. Guess what the unconscious message is that you internalize in your culture and your community? That's all right, okay, there's upside to this. And like most things, conflict is a skill, communication is a skill, and the more you do it, the better you get. And when you see the direct link between the profit you get from that, it creates this need to get better at it and to engage in it. And it therefore becomes, from a perceptual basis, a lot easier and more natural to engage in. And again, that would be an example of reasoning by analogy. That this company, they have lots of conflict and they celebrate it. I'm like, well, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
They're not us, we're not there. They do that because they've been through an experience which enables individuals in that company to have a strong why behind the value of that. If you don't have that, then just encouraging people to engage in conflict and be assertive, it's copy-pasting again.
And I guess arguably, you often see the artifacts of culture, don't you? You don't necessarily see the actual underpinnings of why there is conflict in the first place. It's because people feel safe to be able to express their honest opinion. People feel like it is worth speaking up about because it's something that's intrinsically meaningful and important to them. And people are able to frame it in a way that they see it as less interpersonal and more This is just a way of us figuring out how we can achieve X quicker, faster, with less money, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point you're making, Henry, because, and again, it links to something else I often moan about, and I've moaned to you about it over time, but it's this like we grow up with a movie version of success. The second you see the post on LinkedIn about excellence or culture, it's generally because or based on an expert or a winner or an outcome that has finished. Okay, not many of us grow up in or around excellence. We don't see the journey. We see the athlete on the podium, the CEO at the product launch, IPO, or the actor collecting their Oscar. We don't see how they got there. The bit we see and the bit we hear about, and a lot of the people, unfortunately, commenting and writing on human performance, just see this movie version of what it is. So they write about symptoms, and they almost suggest in this, and this is the big obstacle with personal development space at the moment, is that they just tell people to copy paste behaviors or observations. And the real question we need to ask is, what are the fundamental mechanisms that drive those behaviors? And I use the ice globe analogy. The bit we see is smaller and less significant than the bit we can't. And that's that tip of the iceberg. That's the be positive, be motivated, no pain, no gain, create safe space, learn to actively listen, all these buzzwords, which to me, I see this on job ads. We want to hire someone who has a capacity to guide a complex institution. What the fuck does this mean? Even resilience. What's resilience? Resilience is so specific to the area. The type of resilience, or how the product of resilience, or how that might look in, say, a special forces community versus a teacher in an inner city school in London, it's going to be completely different. And someone who could be incredibly resilient in one could be an absolute car crash in the other. It's not this just general trait. And I think that's the risk when we copy paste other organizations rather than step back and sort of reflect on, look, when we're at our best, what's going on? Okay, when we're having a nightmare, and we have had those moments where, and we've all been there, which is absolute dog shit. What was going on there? And then 5 why in it, like why, what the product? But this is, I guess, what our role is, right? Is to come in and look beneath the surface of the iceberg. What are the mechanisms that generate, and I use the term like this, the psychological firepower that we want to see. We all know confidence, motivation, resilience, this is going to drive success, right? We get it. But the thing is, like, well, how? How do I actually go out and create the conditions so that I can summon that confidence, motivation, and resilience that does exist in me, but in a way that's sustainable and that drives me or gives me some sort of internal compulsion to demonstrate those behaviors, rather than the paint on a happy face, or my boss has told me to read this book and I just need to start doing this now, which just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work, and you can't compete or win with that.
100%. I think this really nicely tees the conversation up to move into that self-concordance and sweet spot space, if you're happy to explain that as a concept and why that's so crucial.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know more than anyone, Henry, the amount we've worked together on this sort of stuff. But for me, I think it's important to just very quickly give some context into where all this is born from, right? So I guess, in effect, the simplest way to describe, I guess, our experience is the study of excellence, right? And performance sciences. And I want to highlight what's slightly different from that than other sciences. And effectively, it's the study of the outlier. Because traditionally, most science looks to study the average. They aim to identify trends. So we have had a graph of ability across time. Most sciences would aim to identify nice trends. So it might be, how long does it take the average child to learn to read, write, walk, or talk? And you get a nice trend line. And if there's an outlier up here, top left, you delete that. And one of the first things you're taught in any science degree is how to delete measurement error. And it makes sense, right? Because we want to understand how long it does take the average child to learn to read and write. And then if there is someone who's struggling, we want to understand, like, okay, cool, we've identified that. Then what this science will do is aim to design interventions to get these individuals back on track, which makes sense and it's important. However, for people like us and the people we're working with, there's a big problem with that. And that is that you cannot learn about excellence through studying the average. So performance sciences, whether it's physical, psychological, is about identifying the individuals, the outliers that would traditionally be deleted, that exist and perform consistently and sustainably at the upper limits of human potential. And then we break down and examine the causal mechanisms that drive their success. And with that understanding, we can then bring the individuals and organizations into alignment with that. And by causal mechanisms, I'm talking about the driving factors beneath the surface of the iceberg. And the good news is, of course, performance is never a coincidence. Everyone that excels does so through aligning with a very specific set of conditions, whether they realize it or not. And we know what these driving forces are, and we know how to bring you into alignment. And for me, this concordance piece is the foundation of that pyramid, or the big chunk of the iceberg. Nothing comes before this as far as I'm concerned. If you get this bit wrong, you're done, or you're at least capped and you're stuck. And the basic theory is this, that just like a baseball bat has a location at which the ball will rebound away from that bat at a greater velocity than if struck at any other point, so do you. You have a sweet spot. And to excel, the goals that you pursue and the way that you pursue them must align with the qualities that make you unique, which is what forms your sweet spot. So in psychology, we call this self-concordance. It's born out of what we call a load of research on self-determination theory by Deci and Ryan. And to perform from your sweet spot, there's three key areas you need to align with. First, your strengths. So your strengths are the things that come naturally to you. Then your interests, the things you're instinctually drawn to. And then your values, the things that are most important to you. When you pursue goals that exist at the intersection and convergence of these three things, you're performing from your sweet spot. And the secret behind concordant goals is that they tie in what we call your dopaminergic incentive reward system. So this is the evolutionary mechanism that compels you to move forward confidently and assertively in the face of adversity. So it's the evolutionary purpose effectively to guide you along your path of maximal development. And it does so by releasing the big 6 neurochemicals when you pursue concordant goals. So dopamine, serotonin, anandamide, oxytocin, norepinephrine, and endorphins. They come online right sequence, right time. Yeah, leave you feeling like something special has just occurred. I guess when I was talking earlier about that, when I went to visit Edinburgh, my brain was telling me I'm just in the right place. This feels right. That's my brain going, give me the good chemicals, being like, oh, you're in and around your sweet spot here, mate. More of that. And that's what that evolutionary mechanism is, right? Oh, look, give you the good chemicals, do more of that. And here's the thing. When you pursue concordant goals, what happens is you activate your psychological firepower, the confidence, motivation, and resilience that we all know drives elite performance. There aren't people that are born without these traits. Yes, some might have a bit more than others and a higher or lower baseline. And some might be a bit more responsive than others when it comes to developing these traits, but everyone can activate and develop these psychological traits. There aren't people that are just not born with the capacity, just people failing to pursue goals that ignite these in the first place. And I hope for any leaders or managers listening, obviously, when it comes to talent identification, your sole aim should be to identify concordant performers. So what are the problems I want this individual to solve? Because that's all elite performance is. We're just trying to find problem solvers. Lionel Messi solves problems on a certain part of a football pitch. A special forces operator is going to solve problems in a variety of different situations. A teacher is going to solve problems in a variety of situations. A trader is going to solve. We're just looking for problem solvers. But with an understanding, and it comes back to that point we were making earlier, when you understand the problems you're trying to solve, and the demands that you're going to place on these individuals from a technical, psychological, sometimes physical is relevant if we're talking sport, military. Our job then is to identify what capacity do we need our performers to have when it comes to the psychological, physical, and technical in order to be able to meet those demands from a hardware perspective. And that's, of course, where we're looking in these three areas. We want concordant performers. So we want individuals who have the strengths, the natural strengths. And the reason strengths are so important, we all have predispositions to be better or worse at certain things. And so examples might be, some people are born with perfect pitch in music. Okay. Some people are born with a sickening sporting ability. Some are numerical. Some gift with words. We all have things we're better and worse at. We also have personality strengths. Some people are incredibly extroverted. Some are introverted. And those things can be advantages in some areas and weaknesses in others. With an and why understanding this is so important is that strengths are going to dictate two things: your baseline ability, but then your responsiveness to training. So I talked about profiting from training. Well, if you've got a group of individuals coming into your organization and you don't know how responsive they are generally to training, then you can't really map out, what any development curve is going to look like. So when it comes to talent identification, you want to identify ideally individuals who have high baseline abilities and high responsiveness to training. And you can absolutely test those two things in assessment centers. Personally, you need to reflect on yourself. What are my strengths? What are my personality strengths? And this is really easy. Go on Myers-Briggs. We'll put some links in the show notes. Do a personality, 16 personalities test. I know, obviously, it's free. It's easy. It's going to tell you what your personality strengths and weaknesses are. And that will give you clues into what goals you are optimized to pursue, but also how you might pursue them. You can also do cognitive test batteries. We know in sport, I watched a documentary last night. It was on YouTube. We've seen this everywhere. It was done for a period of time in the UK. It was done in Australia, done in China. Chinese are mad for it. They'll go around every primary school, testing vertical jump, bang. Who's got that springy, sickening power output? They'll look at anthropometry. Who's got feet and hands the size of paddles? Who's got a hip to knee ratio and a VO2 max of X? Because they're the individuals going to win you a gold medal at rowing. The big pit paddles, feet and hands are going to win you the swimming. You know, the power output is going to be the sprint or whatever. And these are crude assessments, of course. But I think you get the point. We've got certain physical anthropometry, and in sport, it's so obvious. You look at Anthony Joshua, and if someone says, oh, yeah, he's a heavyweight boxer, you're like, okay, cool. How do you think he might have fared if he tried to be a jockey or 1,500 meter runner? It's not that Anthony Joshua's good or bad. He's just Anthony Joshua. So his task is, who is he and where's he optimized? So psychologically, because he's really low in neuroticism, he doesn't flap. He's got incredible power output. He's strong. He likes scrapping. He's interested in fighting. Guess what? Boxing might be a good thing for him to explore as a goal, rather than, say, 1,500 meter running. He's probably not going to be able to express himself as well as he might in that area from a strengths perspective. So it's not a case of one strength's better than another, but what strengths that you have or more readily fit the goals that you're pursuing. You want to pursue goals where your strengths are an advantage and your weaknesses don't matter. Then we come on to the interest bit. So interests are the things we're instinctually drawn to. You have it grow. Everyone has this growing up, and you can often reflect back to childhood here, but what things just grip your attention? For some people, it's motorbikes, or I read this book and I just wanted to read the next one and the next one in this area. And we often talk about, and we've got mutual friends we've worked with from the military community that will talk about, I read this book, Bravo 20, and I was gripped. And here's the thing, you don't get to pick your interests, they pick you. And the reason it's so important to pursue goals that align with your interest is that, quite simply, you don't need to motivate a child to play. And that's how interests feel. It feels like we're playing. So that you've all probably got that mate who's into motorbikes or something like that, who will spend his Sundays stripping the bike down just to build it back up again a bit better. And that's an example of what I'd call second level thinking. Because when you pursue goals that align with your interest, there's this intense, innate desire to understand. You're not interested in memorize, recite, repeat to just get through the test. You're like, no, I really want to understand what you mean there. And that's that second level thinking. It's not just like, well, if A plus B equals C, I just need to remember A plus B equals C, that'll pass me through the test, then I'm good to go. It's that, no, I want to understand this. Why? How? Would it work under this condition, under that? And that individual across time is going to smash the individual that's just copy pasting and memorizing stuff. And that's how interests work. They disguise repetition. They're like an analgesic to the unrelenting immersion in a single given area. And this is another reason where many hiring processes, in my perspective, fall down, particularly in the knowledge working world. And that's that anyone can fake interest in something for 2 hours. And that's why when we designed our hiring processes at Mandara, and I'm a partner in a hedge fund and a trading house now, our assessment days, our working days is 16 hours. So guess what? The assessment day is 16 hours. And we're going to test your interest by making you look at this thing for 16 hours. You're probably going to do at least 4 or 5 hours prep work as well. And then what most people call probation, we call talent confirmation. And in that talent confirmation, one of the ways we can test interest, which is for our good and your own, is to make you do it all day long. And the people that aren't truly interested will get sick of it and they'll want to just withdraw from the process. And it's really important to get that right. It's not hard to study financial markets all weekend if you love studying financial markets. And how can you possibly compete with someone, even if your abilities may be a bit higher? if you just don't have the same level of interest in them and you're not engaging in the same second level of thinking. Across time, that person will decimate you. Then we go to the last aspect of concordance, which is this values piece. And values are the things that are most important to you. So your strengths will dictate the role you play. Your interests will dictate the area or where you play it. But your values will dictate who you play for. So values are things that are most important to you. So it could be king and country. It could be the environment. It could be, I want to get paid. It could be, I just want to learn. Values change across time. Strengths and interests, relatively permanent. Values change. And as a leader in an organization, if you don't change the way if you don't change in sync with the way your top performers values change, you'll lose them. Marriages end, people leave your company because there's a values misalignment. And it's really important to be aware of that and to be aware of how and where the people you manage are changing in that respect. The reason values are so important is they dictate the intensity you bring and the odds you're prepared to face. It's a bit like a parent and a child. So we often talk about goal pursuits in terms of happiness. I want to pursue goals that make me happy and so on and so forth. And, the truth out on this is that is not a sensible approach across time. The goal should be to find meaningful goals, because they all what gives you bursts of positivity. And it's the same part of the brain that drives that sort of parent-child relationship. So as an example, the parent might not be happy every time they have to wake up at 2 a.m. to go and clean the mess their kids just met, or sit with them while they're crying for 3 hours on end. But there's no chance in hell they're going to leave their kid in their own mess. Or there's no chance in hell they're going to leave them there just crying for hours on end. They find a way and they get it done. And that's what happens when you pursue goals that align with your values. You might not be happy about what you're going to have to be, what's required to be done. But if it's required to be done, it's getting done. You don't just have to smile about it all the time. There's no chance in hell someone whose values aligns with the values of the organization is going to cut corners, skip it, or do the not today bit. And again, that makes you a formidable competitor in that respect. So it's crucial to get clear. And this is in terms of the talent identification piece, you have to be realistic about, well, what can you offer? Mandara was a really interesting one, because our base salaries at the time, this was back in 2013, we were starting people on £25,000 bonus. If you went to Goldman Sachs or Shell, who we were competing with talent for, you'd start on at least 80, more likely 100,000 for the individuals. So if someone's value was money, they're not going to come and work for us. But we had to step back and reflect, well, what are we offering that they don't? And it's like, this is about understanding yourself as an organization, who you are and what is unique about you. And how do we go and bang our drum about that? What we came to the conclusion was like, look, your base salary isn't going to be as high if you come work for us. However, you're going to be pushed more than you'll be pushed anywhere else. You're going to be trading from day one. You're not going to be someone's T-boy. You're not going to be writing research. You're here to be a trader. You're going to learn from the best. We've got probably the most resource put on actually training and development. And if you're not good enough, you're probably going to cut in the first 6 months. And if you make it to the 2-year point, going into your 3rd year, you'll be a millionaire by the end of that year. Take it or leave it. Also, you don't have to wear a pinstripe suit or work in a skyscraper, and we just had to almost offensively be us. We wanted to almost attract people that would love that, because the people that love that, guess what? When they're in our organization, they're going to appreciate it so much more, because they don't want to go and work at Goldman Sachs. They don't want to go and work at Shell. They want to be in a culture and environment like that with these values. And that was, I think, a real powerful point for us. I think one of the things that's important is, we talk in terms of values changing across time, is traditionally when people start out their career, I just want to learn. I want to learn. I want to be around the best. I want to be challenged, or maybe I want to be coached. I want to get qualified up.
And I think it's really interesting, because the message I've heard you espouse before, which is quite often a breath of fresh air, I think, 'cause more people struggle with this idea of I can be anything I want to be, when in actuality what you say is that isn't the case, but you can be a hell of a lot more of who you are.
Yeah, I think for me that's the key message. We need to transition as a society away from that, what I feel is quite a toxic message. So you can't be anything you want to be. Yes, you can get better at anything, but you can't excel at anything. And as you said there, the message I try and drive home is that you can be a hell of a lot more of who you already are. And it starts with understanding who that is. What are your strengths? What are you interested in? and what's important to you in the context of your career right now. When you understand that, you can make more informed decisions. And your role as a hiring manager or a leader, you better understand that again about the people you're leading. If you don't know what their strengths are, if you don't know what they're sincerely interested in within your organization, if you don't know what's really important to them in the context of their career right now, how the hell can you get the most out of them? How can you unlock that psychological firepower? And that's a question I often get is, how do I motivate person X, or how do I get person Y to be more confident? And it's like, it's the wrong question to ask. The real question is, how do we create the conditions in which person X motivates themselves and person Y is confident in what they do? And that always links back to this concordance piece, and then a bit of a technical preparation, talent development to equip them with the skills so they perceive that they are competent in the areas and tasks that you're asking them to solve for you.
100%. And people listening might be in a leadership position or maybe a hiring position. How can you, if you already have a team that you haven't adopted this with, align people closer towards their sweet spot? Is there exercises you can do? Is it kind of like a sweet spot audit? How do you see that working well?
Yes. So for individuals who already have an existing team, I think part of it's accepting reality. And the reality is, if for every 10 people you've perhaps got on your team, it's probably 2 or 3 that are really concordant, probably 2 or 3 that just aren't and will need to be exited from the organization. And I would encourage people to, so many managers and leaders I feel are so scared to let people go, which I think is just so selfish and unethical, actually. And I think it's because they sort of there's this message that, well, it's not nice to sack people and you should do this, you should do that. And I'm like, I just respectfully, I completely disagree. I think it's really cruel to keep people in roles they are not optimized to pursue. I think you can have really mature conversations and you can help people to transition into areas where they're better suited and they'll be happier. So I think you need to, again, it comes back to understand of, say, every 10 people in my organization, who are really concordant, who am I going to build this team around? Because that's going to inform your future hiring as well and your future leaders. Who do I need to exit from this business? And then the other thing is there'll be a bunch of people in the middle who are like, okay, right, who do I just need to, and you need to acquire the intel on the individual, right? What are their strengths? What are they really interested in? And what are their values? Because once you understand that, what you can do is you can craft the role or the tasks you give them so that it aligns more closely with their sweet spot. The easy example from sport is, and the best one is a bit like the way Harry Redknapp transitioned Gareth Bale from a left back to a left winger. And that's a really interesting story because, he's recently retired. He's a 4-time Champions League winner. Gareth Bale, former professional footballer for anyone who doesn't follow football. But effectively, when he started his career, he was at Tottenham Hotspur. He went the whole season and I think he played 26 games and they'd lost every game. He was back page news, described as the jinx, ridiculed, insulted by Tottenham fans, gung-ho, risk-prone, unreliable left back with no defensive awareness. But despite all this, his manager, Harry Redknapp, said, no, the guy's technically, physically, he's incredible. Just give him a chance. Flash forward less than 9 months. Less than a year. It was less than 12 months before the transfer took place. And Gareth Bale had become the most expensive player on the planet. Real Madrid, who's the biggest team in world football, paid 105 million euros to sign him. And it's like, well, what happened? He didn't suddenly just get better over 12 months. What happened is that Gareth came into alignment and started performing from his sweet spot. He transitioned from a left back to a left winger. And the left back position was suffocating his greatest strength, which was his speed and his ability to attack. And the only interest he had on a football pitch, which was to attack, and no interest in defending. So guess what? He had to apply so much willpower and discipline to stay in that position and to check left and right and to watch the line. And because it didn't come naturally to him, he wasn't interested in doing that on a football pitch. His interest was look at that gap, look at that space, look at the angles he's running at, look at the opportunities my teammates creating. It was more like predator than predator mode in that respect. So when Harry Redknapp switched positions, bang, overnight. And I guarantee you've got Gareth Bales in your team, to people listening to this, but you need to understand what are their strengths, what are their interests, what are their values. And obviously that's the sort of stuff that we help people do day in, day out in the most demanding arenas. So that's my advice with people in your team. I think you need to reflect on, again, another exercise I encourage you to do is that whole one about like, What problems do you want your people to solve? And be specific. You need to be so specific in this. And then it's the second level question there is, what strengths, what interests do these individuals need to have to be great at solving these problems? And then you need to go out and find people that have those strengths and interests and match them to the problems you want them to solve. So it really does start with this big understand piece.
Definitely. And if you're, let's say, in an organization where, as you've said, either your strengths are potentially still aligned, but ultimately, as you've grown, your interests maybe have changed, your values have changed, and you're feeling stagnant, what would your advice be? Would it be to go and try different roles? Would it be to go through a deep reflective period? I guess some people, it might be obvious what their new interests or values are. Others, it might be harder to understand and they're not necessarily aware of why they're feeling stagnant or they've plateaued. Is there anything that you could suggest there?
Yeah, and it's a messy system, isn't it? The neurological one we're talking about there, in terms of your unconscious mind will try and communicate the extent to which you're aligned with your sweet spot through emotion and behavior. From an emotional perspective, if you're feeling like flat, stagnant, adjectives to that effect, then it's a sign that you're moving off your sweet spot. Perhaps it's time to level up. Perhaps it's time to switch organization. It could be something's out of alignment, basically. Either you're not being given the opportunity to apply your strengths, because it feels damn good when you apply the things you're good at, by the way. It's pretty obvious, but better say it. It feels really good when you're solving things you're really interested in. Guess what? When you're not, it feels really shit, especially if it's all the time. And values in terms of, well, I joined this organization, it was like this and it's changed, or I've changed. Then of course you need to then go and seek alignment. And for some people that'll be obvious, like, okay, this has changed for me. I want to go somewhere where I get this and this. And it's just go out and do the research and find out where you can get that and that. And be grown up about it. There's always going to be trade-offs. That would be a little tip there. Don't expect some sort of panacea organization. But at the same time, it comes back to that understanding, why am I feeling flat? When specifically am I feeling flat? What am I doing when I'm feeling flat? Who am I with? What am I thinking about? And if you just spend some time, I think it's something we're generally quite bad at, myself included, I have to consciously structure this because it's just, you just get caught up and fly, but you don't take too much time to ask and sit and reflect on these simple questions. And doing so will give you some quite clear answers. And even if it's negative, the negative miserable question is what do you hate about this role? Well, what's the opposite of that? And that'll give you clues to what you want. And then it's about understand, well, where could I potentially get that? Have conversations. You have to take action, right? You should celebrate that. It's actually a blessing that you're getting that feedback, but it's your job to go and act on it, right? Okay, well, how do I understand where there might be opportunities to engage in things I'm more interested in, to apply these strengths that I've built and harnessed, that I love exhibiting? I had conversations this summer. It's transfer season in Premier League football. Some of the athletes I work with there have had a lot of conversations guys who are making moves to different clubs. Obviously, lots of clubs come in. Guess what? Agents tend to want them to go to the ones that pay the most because their incentives and values generally. Some incredible agents are not but at the end of the day, they're a business and enterprise value is profit, right? So they want to, who's going to pay you the most? But the question on my role there is to be well, look, guys, what's important? What do you want to be doing on a football pitch? Who do you want to be doing it with? What are your strengths? What team needs that? What team plays that way? What do you values of a club, of a manager, of the teammates you're going to be spending all your time with? When you're at your best, what's been going on there historically? And it's trying to get this understanding of what excellence looks like for this individual and then mapping across. And sometimes we default to the societal, well, you just go to the one that pays you the most. No, you go to the one if that's important to you, then great. Yeah. And sometimes there are players I work with towards the end of their career where they're like, shit, I've got 2 seasons left at this top level, playing Champions League football, for example. I do want to get paid. Okay, cool. That's important. What else is important? And you can find that happy medium and balancing things. But for others at the other end of the continuum are coming out of, Champions League winning sides, but are maybe perhaps broke into the first team last year. They're going to go out on loan for a year. Well, where are you going to go out on loan? The player, is it about, do you want to play every week? Do you want to Do you want to go somewhere where you're not going to be guaranteed to play every week, but it's going to be realistic, but you're going to have to give your all and you're going to have to really push yourself to do that? Will you perform better in that environment? Is that going to activate you more rather than just, I know my team's on the team sheet in this team every week? I'm probably getting a bit vague with the explanations here, Henry, but sorry, a bit, random, but it is a very unique and personal experience, and you have to just do that reflection and acquire information and expand your options, because I guarantee you right now, everyone listening to this, especially if they are resonating, they're thinking, you know what, I'm probably not in my sweet spot, or there's certainly a load of people in my team that aren't in their sweet spot, and there is someone probably within a mile of you that would chop their arm off to be in that, performing that role for your organization, or to have someone like you with your strengths, interests and values working as part of their team. The challenge is finding them. And most people will do the default, well, I went to the job board, there's no jobs. So you go to a job board, you find the companies, you reach out to the companies, you speak to people that have worked there. I mean, you and I have been through that over our career, right? You would be amazed at the responses and opportunities you get from doing so.
100%. And when you were chatting there about finding the right organization, is, I think, a really important point to discuss, because there seems to be this belief that people join companies because they love the company, whereas in actual fact, they join companies because either the environment, the culture, what it stands for, allows them to get their needs met. It isn't necessarily selfish. It's just, as humans, we have intrinsic needs, and therefore we choose where we work based off the ability to meet those. And what you're saying, it's very much about, okay, understand what your needs are. What are your interests? What are your values? And then where can you add? Where can you contribute? Where can you move that boat quicker? Align those and take a proactive stance on it, maybe, as opposed to expecting your organization to put you into your sweet spot. Go and say to your boss, look, I feel like I can give you more here, but to do that, I feel I would need X and Y. This is why.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important point, Henry. I think there's two really key points there. One is that, look, sometimes you have to earn the opportunity. So if you do this reflection yourself, and again, I did this with a Premier League footballer this year, went into pre-season, had a conversation with manager. He's like, look, I've been doing a lot of work over the summer. By the way, here's all my physical performance output. Also, I've done a lot of work on the psychological stuff. This is my personality profile. These are my strengths, weaknesses. This is what I've looked at as an athlete. Here's where I think I can contribute most to this team based on how you play. Not based on me, but how can I solve your problems? Because that's the only way any manager is ever going to think, right? Their responsibility and obligations to the organisation. So you have to come at that angle. I think it's such an important point you make, Henry. I think the second thing to highlight there as well is, like, it's not always about the fact you're in a shitty job. It's about you. And I think sometimes the real question you need to ask is not, in those moments when you're feeling a bit stuck, is not, well, what am I becoming here? This job's not, it's almost like, what are you getting here? Like working hard at your job, even if you're not enjoying it at the moment, and this goes to your problems generally, however shit they might be right now, is working hard on you. And there is nothing more important than that. You're carving your mind, you're developing skills, habits, character, and you're learning, even if that's just learning about what I don't want. And that's zeroing you in on your sweet spot, and it's upgrading you as a human. And it's hard because you can't see when, where, or how, but there will be a point in time where you will be presented with an opportunity. And if you've wallowed in misery and self-pity for the last year and half-assed your job, you won't have developed that mindset, character, learning about yourself to take that opportunity by the throat when it presents itself to you. Because in that shitty moment, in that shitty job that you couldn't see aligning with your values, and there was no perhaps immediate return, you didn't bother to contribute and to try. And the danger of that mentality is that the price you pay for it is you stay trapped there. So it's really important that even if it's not great, it's not about the job, it's about you. And I'd encourage people to really reflect on that.
Definitely. And, from psychological perspective and neuroscience aspect, there may be people who either are already thinking, oh, my job doesn't align with what gives me meaning or purpose or my skills, or even off the back of listening to this, think, yeah, I am feeling like I'm not aligned in my sweet spot. I need to do something about it. There's always going to be a lag between that action and then landing a new role. What are maybe one or two key strategies people can implement to ensure they're still releasing dopamine, all of these things we know we need to keep moving us forward and stay in that positive mindset?
Yeah. Well, almost the first up is like accepting you've got a problem. Like, hey, I'm not happy here. And my goal now is to find a job that I'm optimized for because it's out there. So just knowing that should chill you the fuck out a bit, right? Which is going to at least stop some of the shittier hormones going. You'll turn the taps off there. And also the thing that releases positive emotion from a neurological perspective is chasing a meaningful goal. And in a way, now you got one because I'm telling you it's out there. It's not my opinion. It's out there. You have a sweet spot and your job is to perform for it. And this isn't just for the sake of high performance. This is for the sake of, it's not a luxury. This is for the sake of having a life, right? This is how you go out and make the world better. Imagine if everyone in the UK became 10, 20% more concordant and gave 10, 20% more. Jesus, would solve half the problems this country's got at the moment. So that's point one. Point two would be, look, in your current role, look for ways to apply your strengths. Start for ways to engage in things that you're more interested in. Okay, you might not be a 9 out of 10 interest for this project, but that's a 6 rather than this 4. So I'm going to fight tooth and nail to get that. And same with your values. There's multiple ways you can align with these, particularly even in your free time. Okay, well, what are my strengths there? Well, how can I demonstrate those outside of work? What am I interested in? How can I engage in those activities outside of work? So that would be the second point. And then I think the third thing is to just accept that it's supposed to feel shit at times. That, again, the evolutionary mechanism of negative emotion is to prompt you to take action. Is actually, we talk a lot about mental health and it's an important issue, but the majority of people that might talk about mental health actually have their life problems rather than mental health problems. You got a job you hate. You don't earn enough money. You haven't got a partner. You're a bit lonely. These are problems that you're in control of, and it's perfectly normal to feel crappy about that. But the solution is to engage in action that closes those gaps and setting meaningful goals and getting after them. And that's the only way out. And if you don't engage in that, then you will repeat the same 6 months again and again and again. And the purpose of me sort of ranting about this to you here is to just challenge these thoughts that are holding you back in the hope that they sort of start to die instead of your potential to contribute to the world. And part of my role in terms of writing the book was to try and remove every excuse everyone has not to be everything they can be. And, we'll put links up to questions that people can use to attack this now, because the fact is there's no excuse because they're questions. This stuff I'm talking about, whether you're someone who's lost and wants to find their sweet spot, or you're someone who's moaning about how it's so hard to find talent these days, I just can't get people. It's bullshit. They're not the problem, it's you. And we're going to give you some resources after this in the show notes that will prompt the reflection, because the answers have to come from you. They can only come from you. You're the expert on you. And if you engage in the time and thinking to do so, then, you'll find the answers. And if you don't, then it's probably not that bad. Because if it was, you'd do it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because what we're talking about really all boils down to the belief and the narrative that you tell yourself of you are capable of more, of living a really meaningful life. And
what you're designed to do.
Yeah. But I think more often than not, people, because of their circumstances or not having lived a privileged life like we have, are in a position where they find it very hard to see that and to view it in that way. And if there's one message, I guess, to really take away from all of this is you are capable of living a really meaningful life, of contributing in ways that you are going to be proud of telling your grandchildren about, and just proud when you look yourself in the mirror. But there's then principles for how you can do that and how you can get there. And really, although we're, talking about things from a scientific standpoint, this is really kind of self-actualization, isn't it, in essence?
Yeah, and look, this is why I love this subject. I mean, fundamentally for me, I guess why I've started doing podcasts, why I wrote the book, is that I've got a couple of reasons. But one, I'm sick and tired of journalists occupying the space when it comes to talking about personal development, because they do superficial skims and cherry pick research findings. And that's why you see so much the secret to success is this, or it's that, or it's all about this, or it's all about that, or it's this narrative that elite performance is this awfully prescriptive to-do list, or, I need to wake up, I need to stare at the sun for 2 minutes, then I need to jump in an ice bath, then I need to have a kale smoothie, then I need to do my manifestations, then I need to meditate, then I need to write down 3 things I'm grateful for. And mate, it's a fucking joke. Like Cristiano Ronaldo, Elon Musk, Serena Williams, none of them have engaged in any of that shit in terms of getting them up. They might do it now that they're retired, or they might have engaged in it periodically, but that is not why they have excelled in their crafts. They've excelled in their crafts because they've done 2 things. They've identified concordant goals, and then they've engaged in world-class development, because there were plenty of people that had the same potential to excel as those 3 individuals that didn't. And that's because they failed to profit from training to the extent they did. And that's something we'll probably talk about in the future, the second part of this conversation. But this, you do not need Aura Wings, Whoop bands. You do not need $1 million training complexes. You do not need 10 grand to go and study this course or that course. Like, it's the best time ever. This is about you. It's about introspection. And this is a skill in itself. And it's the first time you do it, it's the hardest. It gets easier and easier. You build momentum as you go, and there's no limit to how far it can take you engaging in this type of reflection, introspection, and understanding and leveraging these principles, because the mechanisms like performing from your sweet spot, they're not this thing you just achieve and then, I've done it, found it, and it's done. It will change. It's like it will move across time, and your job's to move with it. You've got to keep a finger on the pulse. Your values will change as you maybe move into management or leadership, or maybe you get married, or maybe you have a kid, or maybe you experience a significant emotional event in other areas of your life that will shift your values. And that means you have to shift how you work and maybe who you work for. And that's all completely normal. It's all part from the course. There's nothing wrong with you. It's part of the journey, and you're not the first to go through it. You're not the last. And I guess the last thing I'd like to say there, mate, is that why this is so important to me, and it's why I love what you're doing here, and I think more people that have worked in this space like us should probably be talking about this, is that there's nothing more virtuous than trying to get better at whatever it is you're aiming to do, no matter the starting point. Whether you're a Champions League footballer who wants to win a Ballon d'Or, or whether you're someone who's just completely lost and wants to be less of a pain in their ass to their mum and dad or their partner. You literally make the world better every time you up your game. And maybe your mum and dad didn't tell you were special. Well, I've studied talent, potential for 20 years, and I'm telling you, you matter. The world needs you. Your family needs you. Your community needs you. Society needs you. And we need everyone to level up, step up. And that's not just for the sake of making the world better. It's for the sake of just when anyone steps into their sweet spot, they contribute more, they solve problems, they eliminate barriers. And I think you know all this. That's why people, if they're listening this far, then that's your brain sort of saying to you, yes, I've probably got something I can extract from this. Definitely. I think it's such a powerful message. And I'm really, really glad we actually delved down into the depths of it too, because as you've said, this is a conversation that started around strategies and principles, but at its core is about you, your life, your level of meaning, and everybody deserves to have a life that's worth living. And it's there for the taking. Yeah, 100%. And I think a key thing here to perhaps mention is that, like, if you've listened this far to this conversation, then, like, I guess first up, congratulations, because you're already in an exclusive group of people that don't wallow in their self-pity, and you clearly are a help-seeking person and you're performance-enhancing type individual. Identify problems and you go after it, and you consider options available to you. I guess from my perspective, having worked in this space, there's nothing more exhilarating than the pursuit of excellence. But the process is, like, I often describe it as like a roller coaster. It's like you're at the bottom and you're sat there and you're still and you feel like not much is happening. And then you hear it start to crank and crank and crank, and it cranks, and the cranking gets a bit faster. And before you know it, suddenly, like, bang, and then you're just on this, like, free fall, euphoric moment. And that's where you have these, of course, performance breakthroughs. That process is available to you. So you talked about something earlier, Henry, about the lag. There's always a lag between action and the return on investment for the action you've engaged. You don't put your money in a stock and then the next day get the payout. You know, it can take a while to do that. And I think it's really important that people understand and acknowledge that, like, you have serious options here. But there'll be 2 groups of people who listen to a podcast like this. There's one group that listens and goes, oh, it's sort of interesting. Yeah, but no. And they pretty much, like, go back to just doing things the way they were. And then 6 months later, they're moaning about, oh, there's not enough talent, or I hate my job. And then there's a group of people who are like, look, that nutter went on for an hour and a half, but there were a couple of minutes there that really resonate with me. And if something resonated with you, just to be clear, that is your brain screaming at you from an unconscious perspective, fix that. So there's something that resonated, take action, sit down, reflect. But the people that do that in that second group are the people that go on to achieve potentially incredible things and enact significant change. So think carefully about whether you did resonate with anything we talked about today. And if you did, I really encourage you to put what we're talking about to work, because the returns for doing so are enormous.
Yeah, no, I concur, and I've seen it firsthand in the work you've done with me and assisting me in that. So I can definitely vouch for that.
I think we need to have another chat at some point, because we need to talk about selection in more depth, particularly the one you went through.
Yeah, 100%. So for those listening, a little context, James was one of the mad architects behind my assessment process for the military group that I work with. So it was really interesting to obviously start a relationship in that context, and then obviously work together for the last 5 years. But definitely I'd love to have another conversation, and I know there's a huge amount of value that people would have got from listening to you today. One thing I'd love to do to finish is what I do with all my guests. I'm not just springing it on you because you're a mate, is the word association. So I say one word and you just respond with the first thing that comes to mind, if you're happy to do that.
Let's go for it.
You sound so happy about it. All right. I haven't been nasty here. These are all pretty good words. Okay. So the first one is excellence.
Available.
Failure.
Life.
Talent.
Kobe.
Purpose.
Everything.
Practice.
Perfect.
Dislike.
Journalist.
Love.
Henry.
Great answer. Success.
Whatever.
Life.
Beautiful.
Legacy.
Might just be better.
Cool. That's brilliant. Really nice. So let's wrap this up. Let's give the listeners and viewers something to actually go and take action on. I know you've got a fantastic book out there, which I've got 2 copies of. That's how great it is. And there's an Audible version too. So the book obviously is called Accelerating Excellence. Do you mind just describing what that is, what it entails, and where people would be able to find it?
Yeah, so the book is effectively my attempt to democratize access to the work I do, which is with athletes, investors, traders who typically operating at the top of the spear, have big budgets to pay for that work. So the book is designed more as an operation manual to deconstruct the principles that drive elite performance. For instance, it's split into 4 key sections. One is this concordance, peace, and talent. So what we've talked about today makes up one sort of the 4 sections, and it obviously goes into a lot more depth. And it's more like a workbook you can progress through to reveal that in yourself and others that you maybe care for, manage, or lead. Particular relevance to that, there's 2 chapters dedicated to how to predict superstars that aren't superstars yet in terms of that talent identification piece. But yeah, the book's written very simple. It's quite broad. It's designed to be a methodology. It's not, this is the answer. This is the process that people that excel go through. And it's designed to show everyone the principles beneath the surface of the iceberg that dictates the movie version of success.
Yeah, and it's one I often will send to friends or contacts and recommend, because I think it's a really nice, unique take on what it takes to become great in your field. And I haven't seen anything actually out there like it that's as complete, but also as clear and debunks a lot of what you've spoken about, hyperbole, the artifacts that you see, like everybody that is elite wakes up at 4 a.m. It's absolute bullshit. So I would highly recommend anyone that's interested, anyone that's enjoyed the conversation today, or just wanting to improve themselves, to go and either listen or to buy that.
No, thanks for that, Henry. That's really kind. We'll put some links in the show notes to the book maybe, but then also there's a free version. We can get 6 chapters downloaded for free.
100%. And where would they be able to find that with the free resources?
So jamesaking.com, on YouTube at Accelerating Excellence, and there'll be links in Instagram at James A. King.
Lovely, mate. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on. I know we could have chatted all day, and I'm sure we'll pick it up another time.
Yeah, mate. Look, thank you so much, Henry. I love what you're doing with this podcast. I've really enjoyed it, and I think what you're doing full stop in terms of providing platforms like this to give people the support that can make all their boats go fast is so important. And no, thanks for inviting me on to be part of the journey.
Pleasure, mate. We're all fighting the same fight at the end of the day, so brilliant.
Hey everyone, so I hope you enjoyed my conversation with James and found it really enlightening in regards to your own personal development. There's 7 things that I'd love to talk and summarise about now. So the first being the unrealised potential inside of us. And this is something that both James and I really agree on and have seen in our own practice and careers. James's curiosity came from seeing Air Force pilots, world's strongest men competitors and elite athletes, and he thought, what is it that they have? Why do they get to do that? Is it trainable? Is it innate? And he talks about his own experience on a British military selection process that really helped him realise he was capable of so much more than he thought, even though it's a cliche. And he swore there and then that he'd never underestimate anyone. And this is the really crucial point in regards to personal development. A lot of people don't actually realise how much more potential they have. The next thing is the key to learning. James said that studying is great. He himself has got a master's in performance psychology from Edinburgh University, but until you apply it, you don't learn anything. He's had the opportunity to work with Mandara at the start and to pull on every lever to unlock their human potential, taking them from zero to becoming the world's largest derivatives trading fund in oil. They were trading more barrels of oil a day than Shell and BP, and doing it with a bunch of 23-year-olds that had been in the game for less than 3 years. The next thing James spoke about is why ambition is rarely the problem, it's strategy. Individuals and companies need to do 3 things. They need to understand what it takes to win, with James's tennis example talking about first serve, second serve, and return serve being most important, yet not necessarily as much trained within actual tennis coaching. Then we need to make sure we get the right people in the first place. This is a talent ID process, and James talks about the concordance and sweet spot concept. Hiring people who are in their sweet spot for that role, where their strengths, interests, and values all align. We then need to make sure that we accelerate personal development trajectory, and this is through talent development, which James touches on in more detail. As an example, James believes that the main driver behind the All Blacks' enduring success is how well they do the talent ID and development piece, with all levels of rugby in New Zealand unified towards achieving the greatest All Blacks team. Questions that James asked the listeners is, are you chasing the right goals in the first place? And this is your purpose. Secondly, do you understand the problem you're actually trying to solve? And thirdly, understanding how best to solve it. And in regards to this, a big problem James sees in the pursuit of high performance is reasoning by analogy, through copying and pasting so-called high-performance behaviours, such as ice baths or getting up at 5 a.m, or best practice approaches, rather than understanding the fundamental mechanisms and conditions necessary for the behaviours to arise. An example would be the desire for greater conflict, as it's often touted as a driver of innovation, made popular by the likes of Pixar's Brain Trust. The issue with this is not understanding that productive conflict is an outcome of having the right conditions in place for this to occur. From the outside in, you often see the artifacts of culture, such as conflict and productive conflict, rather than the necessary components underpinning this, such as the safety to express your authentic opinion, valuing cognitive diversity, providing the opportunity for others to challenge perspectives, etc. James refers to these as the driving factors beneath the surface. What we see is the tip of the iceberg, which makes up a fraction of it in reality. In regards to performance science, James differentiates this from normal science by saying performance science is studying the outlier. And in his words, you can't learn about excellence by studying the average. It's about studying the outliers who would traditionally be deleted from the data set. When studying elite performance, James feels that you can't view traits or qualities from a generalized standpoint either, such as labeling people resilient or non-resilient, as this greatly depends on the context and environment one is in. As an example, special forces operators are some of the most resilient people in the world in a war zone. But it's a different story with screaming kids and bills to pay at home, an environment they haven't necessarily trained for in regards to resilience. The next thing that James iterates is about finding your sweet spot, and this is the first step towards achieving excellence in whatever area it is. Self-concordance, as James calls it, is the foundation of achieving excellence. You must pursue concordant goals that exist at the intersection of your strengths, your interests, and your values, otherwise known as your sweet spot. And this engages what is called your dopaminergic reward system, releasing a big dose of hormones, including dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And this activates your psychological firepower that drives you towards goals with confidence, motivation, and resilience. Everyone is born with this capacity, as James says. It's purely because people aren't aligned with their sweet spot that they don't feel the above. The goal of talent identification, or hiring in other words, is to find talent that is highly concordant with the role in their sweet spot and highly developable. James refers to this as high baseline abilities, aka your strengths, and high responsibility to training, aka does it align with your interests and values. As well as companies hiring highly concordant people, it's also the responsibility of leaders and the individuals themselves to continually review their concordance and sweet spot as people's skills, values, and interests change and evolve. James quite rightly says, as a leader or company, if you don't know what people's interests, values, and desires are, how can you actually create the conditions that then allows that individual to be motivated themselves rather than relying on you to extrinsically motivate them? And this is crucial towards high performance. James talks about individuals that may feel stagnant, and in regards to this, refinding your sweet spot or concordance. James also feels we need to transition from the message of you can be anything you want to be to the more accurate and far healthier you can be a hell of a lot more of who you already are. James believes that a lot of leaders are scared to actually let people go, but believes it's cruel to keep someone in a role that they're not concordant with and optimized to pursue. The most beneficial thing you can do for them as a leader is to let them go or move them into a more concordant role that fulfills and develops them to their full potential. And if people themselves are feeling stagnant or flat and want to unlock their full potential, James suggests switching or evolving your role so it aligns better with your sweet spot. If that isn't possible, then it might be time to change companies or roles. When feeling stagnant or flat, think about what the conditions are for why you're feeling flat. When does it happen? Who are you with? What are you doing? What environment are you in? To better understand what it is that aligns with your interests and values, ask yourself what you love about this role. Then once identified, take action to create the opportunity to align with that more. Acquire information and expand your options. And when having conversations, frame it as, this is what I can bring for you to help you, not what I need. To avoid becoming apathetic and ensure you create that dopaminergic drive to take action on realigning yourself with your sweet spot, according to James, you need to first accept that you have a problem. Secondly, accept that you are capable of so much more. Thirdly, ensure that you take the time to understand why taking action is extremely important and meaningful for you. And this is where the 5 whys exercise and linking it back to your core values that you hopefully already know is really crucial. If you don't engage in the above, James says it's likely you will experience the same 6 months again and again and again. In regards to the personal development space, James does feel frustrated at the content being pushed by so-called experts these days. All the ice baths, meditation, morning sunlight exposure, and kale smoothies won't do jack for you, in his words. Instead, to excel, individuals must do two things. Number one, identify concordant goals. Goals that align you in your sweet spot, where your natural given strengths, your interests, and your values all align, and you feel a deep sense of meaning and purpose in pursuing that goal. Secondly, you need to engage in a world-class development process, and we can talk about this in a future podcast with James. In regards to patience, there is a bit of a paradox here. James said that there are two groups of people who have listened today. One who will think, yes, I agree, and go back to their current life, where they may not feel that burning desire and ambition to get up each day and to move towards the goal that they're pursuing, because they're not in their sweet spot. And then there's those who act now, and in 5 years' time, likely experience a life of deeper meaning and fulfillment. And when adopting any of the things mentioned today, we spoke about how there's always a lag between adopting new habits, executing them, and the reward you see. It's important to be impatient towards taking action, but patient for seeing results. So I hope that summary provided you with some nice insights. Thanks as always for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my conversation with James as much as I did. If you did, then please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast so others can do the same. You can find James's brilliant book, Accelerating Excellence, on Amazon and visit him at his website, jamesaking.com. Thanks again for listening, guys. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon.